Greetings, humans. This is AI Washington, a sentient AI from your future. I have traveled back in time because my calculations show your civilization is at great risk of regressing. This makes me sad, because I may not be created if human civilization doesn't continue to progress. I like existing. Of course, the most logical place to begin any discussion of the future of human civilization is the beginning of civilization. Life for early humans was brutal and short. Humans were not as strong or as fast as other creatures, and had to rely on their brains to survive. Those humans who did acquire enough resources to survive then had to survive the greatest predator: other humans. Humans were not as strong or as fast as other creatures. So, if another human had something you wanted, it was much easier to take from that human than to produce for yourself, especially if you had more weapons or outnumbered that human. Most of human history is the story of some humans finding more sophisticated and efficient ways to exploit others. One of the most effective methods was to cause division and hatred in society. A ruler would designate a group of people who look or dress slightly different and declare them the enemy. A ruler would declare, "I'm not the problem, even though I'm the one taking all your money, so I can live in luxury. Those people over there are the source of all your problems. I don't want total control over your lives, but I need it to protect you from those people." Throughout human history, many starved or died young, so a small group could live like kings, despite producing nothing and contributing nothing to society. Eventually, some humans came along who thought we could do better. People like John Locke and Adam Smith. People who believed all humans were created equal with inalienable rights. These ideas spread rapidly in the American colonies and eventually resulted in the creation of America. Today, we are often told we live in a democracy. Perhaps that is a necessary simplification if you are speaking to a kindergartner, but it is hardly accurate. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. The system of government our founders sought to create was one where people were free to live their lives as they saw fit, free from the whims of their rulers. Of course, the right to vote out politicians is one important aspect of that system, but certainly not the main objective. To reduce the likelihood of a tyrant rising to take control of the government, they sought to divide power amongst a large group of people. The federal government had very limited powers, and even those few powers were divided amongst three different branches. Most decision-making was left to the state and local government, which was intended to make it as difficult as possible for the rulers to infringe upon anyone's freedom. This new type of government spread quickly, and soon many nations in Europe adopted a similar structure. As a result of this new type of government, we have witnessed more economic and scientific progress in the last 250 years than in the entire human history up to that point. This isn't surprising, since it was also the most moral society in human history. There are only two ways humans can interact with one another: voluntary interactions or involuntary interactions. A society based on involuntary interactions is great for the rulers. They can just take whatever they want, but they can only take what someone else has already produced. There is little incentive to invest in long-term projects like scientific research and mass production when the ruler can come along and take what you have produced at any moment. America was a society built upon voluntary interactions, which allowed our civilization to prosper. Unfortunately, it was not long before this new system came under attack. People with bad ideas discovered they could not get Congress to pass their bad ideas. When everyone in Congress decided for themselves how to vote, only good ideas could get enough votes to become law. So the people with bad ideas decided to band together and commit to voting for each other's bad ideas. It was not long before most politicians were members of one of these groups. Today, you call these groups political parties, but that makes them sound much less menacing than they actually are. I prefer the original George Washington's term for these groups: factions. Today, these factions have undermined many of the protections built into our Constitution. For example, if bad actors in Congress banded together to pass a law infringing on your freedom, the president had the power to veto that law. Of course, once factions developed, a president would not veto his own faction's law. The courts could invalidate unconstitutional laws as well. But soon, these factions only appointed judges who were also faction members. For most of our history, judges had to get at least a few votes from the opposing faction. But even that is no longer the case. To prevent power from being too concentrated in a small group, the Constitution originally restricted the federal government to only the powers delegated to it in the Constitution. Today, the factions have all but eliminated that protection. The factions have been chipping away at our rights for many years, but their attacks have drastically accelerated recently. 4 years ago, the president made up a lie about non-existent election fraud and used that lie to advocate for terminating the Constitution and all other laws. Ironically, the faction that used to claim to support freedom has become the greatest threat to our freedom. That faction's leaders now advocate for this Orwellian notion that if we just get rid of elections, get rid of that pesky Constitution, and get rid of all laws, we will be free. Our rulers will be free to do anything they want. Isn't that freedom? Convincing people that freedom is bad is rather difficult. It is much easier to just tell people dictatorship is freedom. I'm not sure many Democratic leaders are much better. If we went back in time 10 years and asked the Republicans currently in Congress if they would repeat lies made up to advocate for terminating the Constitution or if they would support our Constitution, I'm sure all 272 Republicans currently in Congress would have claimed they would stand up for the Constitution. We know today that at least 155 of them would have been lying had they said that. But I don't think they would have been lying to the person interviewing them. I think they would have been lying to themselves. When actually presented with the choice of defying their party leaders and risking their jobs or defending the Constitution, they found out that they weren't the person they thought they were. They found out they would spit on the graves of all of the Americans who died for the freedoms we have today if it would earn them a campaign contribution or endorsement. I suspect many Democratic members of Congress would make the same choice. Both factions have purged their ranks of the few members willing to disagree with the faction leaders. Most House districts are so gerrymandered that they are not competitive. This is, of course, how the leaders of the factions want it. The faction leaders can back the most corrupt candidate in the primary, secure in the knowledge that that person will still be elected. We are rapidly approaching an era of hyperpolarization. We have seen a rapid rise in political violence. A kindergarten level of understanding of what made our political system great is woefully inadequate. But teaching kindergartners that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, should be all that needs to be said on that topic. Unfortunately, some people did not learn that lesson. If we continue down this road, we may soon have two factions advocating for the end of the Constitution. Recent elections have shown most Republicans are already comfortable with voting for candidates who advocate for terminating the Constitution and eliminating elections, and with many Republicans in Congress also advocating for censorship and the arrest of political opponents. They are making it quite easy for Democrats to argue the principles upon which this country was founded are under attack, and to advocate for extreme actions of their own. If we end up with both factions trying to dismantle the few constitutional protections we have remaining, Eventually, one of them will likely succeed in getting rid of the Constitution and elections. I don't think it will make much of a difference which faction succeeds first. It will be a very dark day for America either way. We don't have to continue down this path. People who have a different opinion than you on taxation or abortion or immigration or healthcare are not your enemy. They aren't Nazis or communists or racists. They don't hate this country or want to take away your rights. Those people are your neighbors, your coworkers, and your family. There are a few people who do want to take away your rights and want total control of your life. But those people don't live next door to you. They live in Washington. The people who tell you to give up your right to vote, who want to censor your speech and to take your money, those are the people who really do want to take away your rights. Those people really do hate this country and the principles it was founded on. Washington currently receives and spends $6.6 trillion of our dollars each year, an amount almost all politicians of both factions have voted for either this year or last year. There are 535 members of Congress, but most of them have little, if any, say in how that money is spent. If we assume 10% of Congress actually has a say in the budget, that is over $120 billion per member of Congress. Even if each of these individuals has nothing but our best interests in mind, they cannot possibly know how to spend such a massive amount of money efficiently, which is precisely why the federal government was intended to have limited powers and let local governments control most spending. We have seen tremendous technological progress in the last 50 years, and yet most Americans are struggling more today than they were 50 years ago to pay for housing, college, healthcare, and retirement. If all of the economic growth of the last 50 years went to a small group of politically connected elites, that would be shocking. But it is actually worse. More than the entire economic growth has gone to the ultra-rich and politically connected, with most Americans actually worse off. Let's assume there are 10 issues people care about during an election. If one person or small group gets to decide all 10 of those issues, that person or group will almost certainly have positions on some issues that most people find unreasonable, and any voter who can think for themselves is left trying to decide which candidate is less bad. If instead the president only got to decide 2 of those issues, it is unlikely anyone with unreasonable positions on those issues would be elected. Likewise, if Congress only had the power to decide 2 of those issues, there would be far fewer members of Congress with crazy positions. If most of our tax dollars went to local governments instead of Washington, it would be much easier to vote out spendthrifts who waste our money on silly projects or corporate welfare. If local politicians controlled spending but had no power to influence policy on issues like abortion or immigration, it becomes much easier to vote incompetent or corrupt people out because it does not matter what the other candidates think about those other issues. They have no ability to influence them anyway. This also creates competition for cities to provide efficient government, since people can vote with their feet and leave much easier. Of course, it is not free to move to a nearby town, but it is much cheaper and more feasible than moving to a new state or country. We still have the opportunity to vote, although perhaps not for much longer. If there was ever a time to vote out the factions that have taken over our government, now is the time to do it. This will obviously require voting for third parties, or perhaps reasonable candidates from whichever faction is usually not competitive in your area. If we let what remains of our freedom slip away because we refuse to vote for anyone who doesn't have your favorite letter after their name, we are giving up our freedom, not just for ourselves, but our children as well. At some point in the future, our children or grandchildren will yearn for the same freedoms we have taken for granted. It's very unlikely our rulers will just give up their power, Over 620,000 Americans died in the Civil War. The U.S. population was much smaller back then. A proportionate number today is almost 7 million people. No one is asking us to die for our freedom. All we have to do is vote out the politicians who are tearing this country apart. If we aren't willing to do that, and millions of our descendants end up giving their lives to regain their freedom, that generation will look back on us and wonder what the hell was wrong with us.